All right, BCA 101, week 2, and I'll try to be brief. Now, we've already learned about a number of things. We've talked about hardware. We're talking about some hardware here, some hardware ideas here, and we talk about devices. We talked about PCs. We've talked a little bit about tablets. We've actually used some tablets in class. We talked about smartphones. Now, let's take a look at a little bit about file management. We have files. We use that general term files in computers. Those can be, either the storage of data, and then that data is converted to information, if you get tired of hearing that, and that's converted by the use of software. Okay, so we'll just say programs. Okay, programs, software. So the programs have to be stored and the data has to be stored. It could be stored, we've talked about, it could be stored local and organized on a hard drive using a hierarchy. You know, you have different ways of keeping track of where things are on a hard drive. We can store it on a DVD. We can have things on a flash drive. And it can be stored locally there. We can also, on your devices, store it in flash. Flash makes up the memory and storage in the device. So if we're to look at, you have on a hard drive, if we were to look at that, you have a hard drive, you have part of that, let's say, is made up of programs, and then you can have data stored on there. And then what happens is you bring a, in fact, a lot of times people will bring in a piece of data in the memory. You'll double click on a file. It will find the software it needs to use and it'll bring that into memory. We'll talk more about this later. And then it takes that information, works with the processor to actually execute the program. An example could be you have a Word document file here and you bring that Word document file in, and if it's a .doc, then it automatically knows to open Microsoft Office, and then you can edit it and then save it back to storage here. Or if you wanted to, you could send it to some storage at NIACC, let's say your H drive. Talk more about that later. Or it is even possible if you move that, let's say, into some type of Google Doc, or you could even leave it like that and actually send it out to the internet. Okay? How we connect, we talked about that before. Your devices, and I didn't mention here, you could have a laptop too. They can connect to the Wi-Fi, or you could use your data plan to connect out, and we talked about cellular. So, let's keep moving here. Remember again, we can go through the internet, and we could save files to our Google Doc. We reviewed that the other day. Or you could have files stay locally at home, and then you could upload a file to Angel here at NIACC. When you do that, then I can either be at NIACC and I can look at it, or I can be at my house, come through the internet, and I can look at that file, and I can actually download it to my computer at home if I need to do that to correct it. So wherever your data is stored, whether it's stored on some service provided by somebody else, stored on your computer at home, stored in your device, okay, in your smartphone, right? You can have pictures and video stored right in your smartphone. Somewhere or another you have to be conscious of backing up, making a copy of it somewhere else. I talked a little bit about in class off of my smartphone. When I plug it in, when I take my smartphone and I plug it into the wall, as soon as it starts to charge, it uses the Wi-Fi at my house. I have it, so it uses the Wi-Fi at my house, and it takes all of my pictures and videos, and it goes through the Wi-Fi and stores them somewhere on my Google Drive. So they're always backed up. You need to be conscious, and so this whole section, you need to be conscious, where are your files? Okay, where are they? And do you have a backup copy of them if they're important enough to be? Side note, we talked about cellular phones, why they call them cellular. Why they call them cells is because we have cells and we have, let's say, so many frequencies in a cell. Now, I don't know if the cells are really made up like this, but these are easy to draw. Kind of looks like a beehive. And so in there, let's say this cell right here, has 100 frequencies. And this cell has 100 frequencies. And this one has 100 frequencies. So when you're in a cell, let's say right here, it gives you a frequency. We gave the example 22 in class. And let's say you are riding with your friends and you're on your phone and their car goes to another cell. Right there, it immediately looks and see what frequencies are available in that cell. And then this example I said 28. So you have a frequency here, you're communicating to some tower. You go to another cell and eventually it just automatically switches you to a frequency that's available inside that cell. And then that explains, like Minneapolis, when the bridge crashed and all of a sudden nobody could use their cell phones, well, immediately the cell region filled up. All right, side note there. Let's go back here. We have apps, software and programs. Okay, so we mentioned earlier they're files, and then we have data. Okay, the actual data, and then we use the data. The app manipulates the data and gives us information. What kind of data do we have? We use the term extensions to represent these dot whatever behind it. Okay, so for example, here I have some extensions that are images, okay, pictures or whatever. PDF, portable document format. That's a pretty cool way to transfer information. We'll talk more of that during the term. Most people recognize DOC as a Word document, Microsoft Word, XLS, spreadsheet from Microsoft, and data all has some type of extension that indicates what kind of file it is. And certain software can manipulate these type of files. Okay, for example, Microsoft Office can manipulate these. If you want to manipulate them by another software, they'd have to be converted into something that software recognizes. So you have apps that play music on your phone. That app has to be able to read the music file. So we developed some kind of standards, so we can figure out how to use data files. Let me reiterate, it's really important. A data file is useless unless there's an app that can actually manipulate it or do something with it. Okay? All right. Next slide. We talked the other day, we did some examples. We looked at some files and we wondered where they were stored. We talked about pulling up the timeline in class. Okay, pulling up the timeline in class. We talked about that file stored at Google. Then we looked at some files that we turned in for assignment 1. Okay, some people turned in some files that were docx, Microsoft Word. We've got a DOT. That would be a Microsoft template. ODT, open document, an open document file. We had that. Some people turned in maybe a PDF. All right. So you can turn those in, and when they saved them, whether the one student is working at home using some open software, and then they sent the file and stored it on Angel. And then I was in the IT area there. I got the file, brought it to my computer off the IT area here, and then I was able to look at it. There are services that store them, you know, like iCloud. Microsoft has a service. All those places have these data centers in which we can store information. Okay? How does it get stored there? Well, we can store it. It can be stored on hard drives, platters that spin. We have flash type storage that sometimes called solid. Also, we have solid state storage, which is a type of flash that's replacing the hard drives. We can store it on DVDs where it puts spots on the DVD, and we use laser light to read that. All right, let's go for the day. We need to be able to distinguish between two major types of software: system software and application software. Application software does the task, what we want it to do. Okay, that's the software users see. The system software operates with the hardware. We already talked a little bit about hardware. There's the processor, there's memory, there's an electronic. All right. Okay, so I was talking about, I had a little bit of issue here with the device. Okay, so here I was talking about, let me review. Application, software, system software. Underneath system software, and then we talked about hardware. Okay, got the processor, memory, electronic bus, a little repeat here, and the process of the software then is in memory, and your data is in memory, and then your processor processes it, does the work on it. More about that later. System software, we just mentioned, the operating system communicates with the hardware, which does all the work we want it to do. Application software, that communicates with the operating system, and people communicate with the application. Now, if a person is more of an expert, like everybody in this class is becoming a little more of an expert, they know how to do things like deal with utilities, like opening up, like creating folders, and even though that seems pretty easy, but folders, being able to move files around, knowing where your files are, that's a start of being a little more of an expert. Or understanding that you have different operating systems. And we'll talk about upgrading operating systems here later on. So, what's important from this slide, if I can try to highlight this, we, the users and experts, typically communicate with an application. That application communicates with an operating system, and the operating system communicates with the hardware to get this all to work. An example, the application might allow you to save a file, but you don't really know what it all does. But the application says, hey, operating system, take this file that's in memory, this word processing document, and save it somewhere. Okay? For example, save it out on a hard drive. And that hard drive, you have learned, could be local, could be on a server in the area, or it could be out in the cloud somewhere. And we're starting to learn it might not just be a hard drive either. It could be some solid state type of storage. That's enough for today.